Hey beautiful soul, it's Jaclyn here from the Lost Labia Chronicles, where I discuss all things lichen sclerosus. So if you have lichen sclerosus or have a partner with lichen sclerosus or a friend and you want to learn more about the disease and how it can intersect with mental health and sexual health, then be sure to subscribe to my channel and hit that notification bell so that you are notified every time I upload a new video. So in today's video, I wanted to touch on the topic of coming out to friends and family because of the fact that the holidays are quickly approaching and many of us tend to see more people than we usually do throughout the year. So I wanted to talk about interacting with others and potentially coming out to others with lichen sclerosus. Okay, so before I dive into some tips and some advice for telling other friends and family that you have lichen sclerosus and what that means for you, I want to talk a little bit about the pros and the cons of coming out to others with LS. So let's start with the pros. One pro is that coming out to others can help alleviate feelings of isolation. Now, many of us with LS know just how isolating this disease can be, and a lot of this has to do with the area that the disease affects, which is our genitals. And our genitals, with that comes a lot of shame and embarrassment and feelings of taboo and stigma, and we just don't talk about it as freely as we talk about other conditions. And because there's not a lot of awareness, we sometimes feel like we're the only person in the world dealing with this disease and we have no one to talk to, so you just bottle it up all inside and it just makes you feel so alone. And so a pro to coming out to others is that it can help alleviate that sense of aloneness. It can, instead of bottling it all inside, you're kind of spreading that outward into the world, which can kind of help lighten things up a little bit. A second pro is that it can help provide context to others for your behaviors, your actions, your words, etc. So, for example, let's say my family invites me to go to like a really big hike. I don't do kilometers or meters, neither of it makes sense to me. So let's just say the hike is like a day hike, right? It's a big commitment. We're not talking about like a 20-minute trail. And I'm an avid hiker. I say absolutely, I would love to do a family hike. I'll bring sandwiches and everything is good to go. Now, the day before the hike, I get into a really bad flare. I've got fissures on my vulva, stinging, burning, aching, I feel absolutely horrible. And I know that to do this big hike is just going to be extremely painful and probably make my flare even more worse because of all that friction that I'm putting on the area that's full of fissures and tears. So I call my family and I say, yeah, I can't go anymore, but I don't tell them why. And they may take it personally. They may wonder why I'm always backing out of things like this. They may wonder, like, does she just not like spending time with us, etc. But if conversely, I called, my parents, let's say, and I said, hey, guys, I can't go on this hike anymore. As you know, I have lichen sclerosus and I'm currently in the middle of a flare. And a flare for me means these symptoms, and these symptoms would be further, exacerbated if I were to go on this walk. And this is why I'm going to not be able to attend, not because I don't want to spend time with you. Maybe we can plan a dinner sometime soon where there's not so much walking and friction while I kind of recover from this flare. So in this case, I gave my family context for why I can't participate in something versus, just not providing that context. And when you don't provide context, sometimes people can take your words and your actions the wrong way. They can take it personally and they can really get hurt. So we kind of alleviate a lot of that tension and hurt feelings and, misunderstandings that can go on when we're not being our true authentic selves and when we're not being honest and open about why we can't do a certain something. And the last pro that I see, or not the last like ever, but of the three that I'm going to highlight, is that coming out to others can help you create a more diverse support system. Now, I'm a huge proponent of having a diverse support system. This means that for me, my support system is made up of different kind of people that add and contribute different things to my support. So for example, as part of my support system, I have my therapists and my counselors. And they are there to really work with me professionally on the mental health aspect. So they're providing me support by working with me on managing my mental health issues in relation to lichen sclerosus and other things, because I've had mental health issues far before lichen sclerosus, but different topic for a different day. So I've got the therapists and the counselors. I also have a huge network of lichen sclerosus support warriors. These are fellow individuals that also have lichen sclerosus. So these people provide me another different kind of support than, say, a therapist. They provide that kind of lived experience and validated experience because they're going through it too. They know exactly what I mean when I say, that I'm anxious about never having sex again, that I hate the way my vulva looks. All these things, they understand it on such this pure level because they're also living through these feelings, these symptoms, and all of that. And then yet again, I have another group of people, and they are comprised of my friends and my family. And they, again, provide a different support, a support that's distinct from the support from people with LS because they don't have LS. So they may not be able to provide the kind of support of someone that knows exactly what this lived experience is like, but they give me a different kind of support and they provide something different for me. So, with my friends, we can kind of laugh about certain things, or I just get to talk with them and share with them, and it just becomes this really this environment where we're just kind of learning together and exploring things together, and for me that works really well. I like having a diverse support system because I think that different people can contribute different things, and that's true even in one group, right? So like not everybody with LS is going to provide me with the same kind of support and validation as others, just like different friends and family members might provide me with different things. My sister has worked, in the medical field a bit, so she can sometimes provide me with, a little bit more support from like a medical angle, talking me through how the system works. Okay, if you have a referral for a gynecologist, this is how the process goes on the back end, that kind of admin side. With my stepmom, I can just kind of call her and cry my eyes out, and she's just so wonderfully compassionate and is amazing at holding space for the types of feelings that I have. And then so it just, again, everyone kind of adds in these different pieces of what I need, and then put together it's this beautiful collective of very strong support. So those are three pros that I see being associated with coming out to friends and family. So let's talk a bit about the cons. So one con is just the very realistic fact that coming out to others with lichen sclerosus puts you in a very vulnerable position. And being vulnerable is hard. And you may not be ready for that level of vulnerability. So I think when you're assessing whether or not you want to come out to others, is you want to think, is this level of vulnerability? Does this feel safe for me? Does this feel right for me in this moment? Is this what I need? And maybe it is what you need, but you're not ready to step into that vulnerable space yet, and that's okay. Acknowledge that it's something you one day want to step into, but you're not going to rush and just jump right on it. And then another con is, just another realistic point of different people need different things. So I talk about, for me, that it's important to have a really diverse support system, but that's not important to everybody, and not everybody needs a diverse support system. Some people just don't want people to know, and they don't need that. And that is okay and super, super valid. So if you're one of those people that, feels a bit of isolation, but gets everything that they need support-wise from, say, a therapist, and there's no need for them to, disclose and talk about their LS to their family, then that's okay. Don't do it. This is, for folks that feel that this is something that they need and that they want. But if that's not what you need, close this video, skip to the next one. That's totally okay. So again, with the cons is just that this is a really vulnerable thing to do, and that it can be very taxing emotionally. And so it's beneficial to kind of pause and see whether you are ready for this. All right, so now I'm gonna move into some tips and advice. All right, so when it comes to tips and advice for coming out to others with lichen sclerosus, I've divided it into 3 main sections. So there's the early stage, the later stage, and then the actual conversation itself. So let's start with the early stage. So the early stage is way before you're going to engage in conversation and tell other people about LS. This is just, you're starting to brainstorm, thinking about who do I want to say, who do I want to tell, what do I want to say to them, so on and so forth. So the first tip that I have is to know your why. So what I mean by this is know the reason behind why you want to tell somebody in the first place, because this may impact what you say to them. So when I talk about know your why, do you want compassion and support? Do you want to just vent to someone? Do you want reassurance? There's so many things that you could want out of a conversation. Do you want to simply inform? Or are you looking to have a conversation and tell somebody because you want to give context to your actions? Tip number 2 builds on the first tip, which is being aware that different people will have different whys. So why I told my sister is because when I was diagnosed, I was told that there could be a genetic link. So I wanted to tell her because I felt if there's a genetic link, she should at least know so that she can take and make informed decisions based on that. She also has a daughter, so, I feel that it's important that she knows so that, if anything, God forbid, knock on wood, happens with her daughter, that she knows what to look for, what are the signs, and, how to proceed. And also because, as I mentioned before, she did work as a medical admin manager, I guess. I don't know her official title, but she worked in a medical office for a bit. And so, I also wanted to get her insight into like the behind the scenes. Like I had a long referral from my gynecologist and it was like, what can I do? Is this normal? Just questions about that. So that was kind of the why driving me telling my sister. Me telling certain friends was, for some of them, it was to give them context for why I couldn't participate in certain activities with them. For others, it was compassion. I just wanted someone that would see me and hear me and, just really be present with me and support me in that kind of gentle way. So know your why, and then know your whys with the different people that you may be considering talking to. And then the last tip that kind of is in this early stage involves kind of like making a draft, almost like writing out a little bit about what you want to say to each person. And you don't have to do every single one of these tips. I'm just sharing what I've found helpful from my lived experience. So please feel free to pick and choose off things that I mention and only choose those that support your journey and your needs, and just toss the other ones to the side. So for me, I found it helpful to kind of write out in advance what I wanted to say to each person. Now, I didn't write like a full-on script, right? But I kind of just did like bullet points of each thing that I wanted to say. So this helped me kind of, have some structure and not forget things, because I have really bad anxiety, and when my anxiety is high, my memory suffers and I tend to forget things that I want to say. So I find that really helpful. And then when I kind of write these little bulleted lists, I really use the first 2 points, which are remembering the why and the why behind each conversation. Now, this is important for me because the different people that I came out to had different whys. What I chose to tell them was different. So I didn't have like a one size fits all conversation that like every single person got. And that's another thing to kind of highlight, is that you have control over how much information you want to tell them. You may just want to say, I have a skin disease, it affects the genitals, it's autoimmune, it's not an STI, it's controlled by corticotopical steroids, and that's it. You may not even want to say that it affects the genitals. You may just say it's an autoimmune skin disease that, can cause a lot of pain and discomfort. And so in a flare, you may not be able to go out on a hike or something like that, right? So you get to pick and choose. And, just because you're telling somebody about your disease doesn't mean that they're gonna have to receive a play-by-play of exactly what your vulva looks like and the history of your vulva and all of that. If you want to, that's your prerogative. I've definitely done that with a few people. But the point is that telling others, you get to make of that what it is. You get to decide the narrative. You get to decide what you're going to include and what you're going to exclude in that conversation. So that's totally in your hands. So those are the tips for the early stage of coming out. All right. So you know the why behind why you want to tell others about lichen sclerosus. Let's now move into that later phase where you're getting ready to have the conversation with someone. So I have 2 main tips with respect to being in this stage and how to kind of proceed. So my first tip is to ask the other person if they're free to talk or if they have time for a conversation. And specifically, I don't just say, do you have time to talk? I also specify the way in which I want to have that conversation. So do you have time for a 30-minute conversation on FaceTime? Or do you have an hour on Friday to have coffee at my place and have a conversation? Something like that, where I'm specifying, the length of period of time that I need and how. So the reason I like to ask for a specific period of time, and of course it may take more than 30 minutes or less than 30 minutes, but a kind of ballpark idea of how long you think you will need to say what you want to say and have the conversation, is because if you don't, let's say I ask my friend or I don't ask my friend and we just start chatting and I start telling her about my diagnosis and what this means for me. Remember that coming out to other people can be really, really, emotionally charged. At least for me, I don't know if it's an anxiety thing, but I get really worked up before these conversations. Like my heart rate gets really, erratic and rapid. I get really sweaty. I kind of get nauseous. There's a lot of emotions that come with putting yourself in this vulnerable space. And so if you don't ask for a specific amount of time and I'm just texting and telling this person, and then in the middle of that conversation, or we're doing a FaceTime or something, and in the middle of the conversation, that person goes, yeah, look, great. Like, I'm sorry, but I have to jump into a meeting or I have to head out for an appointment. And that really abrupt stopping of the conversation can feel really jarring in such an emotionally charged situation. So for that reason, I like to kind of, give a time expectation for the other person so that they can plan accordingly. But it also means that I actually get 30 minutes or the hour, give or take, that I kind of foresee myself needing in order to say and receive what I need to receive. And then my second tip is that if you're feeling any kind of apprehension, or if you're feeling worried about catching the other person off guard, or worried that they might feel uncomfortable, especially if you do want to disclose that it does affect your genitals and you're worried about how that might be received, I like to give a little bit of a warning. This makes me feel a little bit more comfortable, and I think it can be really helpful for other people, because then they can state their boundaries ahead of time if it's a boundary that needs to be set. So what I say typically is just an example. Hey, friend, do you have, like 30 to 45 minutes on Friday for a phone call? Just fair warning, I will be needing some support. Might cry a little. I got a really tough diagnosis, and it does involve my vulva. So if that makes you uncomfortable, no problem, I understand. And if you are comfortable, cool. I just wanted to give you a heads up. So I like giving that heads up, because if somebody if somebody is uncomfortable, I don't want to make them uncomfortable. So if they tell me that's a boundary for me, like I don't feel comfortable discussing, genitalia, then that's okay, and I will respect that. And then, if I do kind of put that kind of disclaimer ahead of time, then I kind of feel like, okay, that's already a huge chunk of the hard part done. They know that it's going to involve my vulva. They know that, I'm looking for support and all of this. So those are my 2 tips on how to kind of create that space so that you can have your conversation. All right, so your friends and family say, yes, I have that time, and no worries, I'm totally comfortable and okay having a discussion about your vulva. So now you're ready to have the conversation. All right, I'm gonna shoot out some tips that, I found helpful for having these conversations. So the first tip is to acknowledge where you're at. Like I said before, this can be a really emotionally charged process, and there's a lot of feelings and stuff that comes with putting yourself in such a vulnerable position. So just remember that vulnerability is a part of being human, and it's, absolutely okay to feel any feelings that you are feeling. The second tip is to dance and or shake off some of that emotional charge prior to having your conversation. So if I'm doing a FaceTime, I don't know, like 5 minutes before I jump on the call, I will like put on a song, or I'll just fucking shake, to just move some of that energy through my body so that I'm not so crazy tense when I actually get into having that conversation. The third one is to remember that your friends and family love you and they only want the best for you. So I try to remind myself when I really start getting into my head and starting to, move into that overly analytic space that my brain just loves to live in. So I just remind myself, your friend, they love you, they care for you, they want the best for you, they're not going to judge you, they're going to be here for you, it's going to be okay. And then another thing I like to do, and this kind of ties into the second step again, is to set expectations. I kind of do it again at the beginning of the conversation. Just want to make sure, again, you're cool discussing my vulva. Another thing to say is like, hey, fair warning, I'm really emotional about this. It's very likely that I'm gonna cry. I don't know, you don't have to set these expectations, but I just like to set them. I have no idea why I like to do this. It just makes me feel a little better that I'm like preparing them for what's to come, if I'm going to be like flooding the tears. Another thing I like to do is I like to start from a more factual, kind of sciencey medical place. So I like to begin by just explaining what lichen sclerosus is. So I'll say something like, hey, I was diagnosed with a disease called lichen sclerosus. They believe that it's an autoimmune condition. It's a skin disease. It typically affects the genitals, but can affect technically anywhere in the body. So people have lichen sclerosus on their breasts, on their arms, their thighs, abdomen. And then I will say it's not a sexually transmitted infection. There is no cure. It's managed by topical corticosteroids. So I kind of just give that general background before kind of stepping into my emotions. That said, this may not always work, especially if it's like your first conversation, because the emotional charge is so high. So I know that the conversations I had later on were a lot more like structured and, moved at a certain pace. Whereas like the first conversations, the first few ones I had, I didn't really start with I don't even know. I just like, and it was just all tears, all emotions, it was really messy, and that's totally okay too. But again, this is just some advice, and if this doesn't fit for you, just toss it. I think that for some people, it can help to kind of get the facts on the table first, and then kind of move into the space of what does this mean for me? How am I processing it? What are my fears? What am I worried about, etc. Now, the other tip I have is to move slowly in the conversation. And again, this can be really hard because when we are feeling emotionally charged, we tend to rush. We tend to just, everything just comes spilling out. But if you can, move slowly in the conversation. Now, the reason I say this is that moving slowly allows you to check in with yourself and to check in with the other person at various stages in the conversation. So why does this matter? Well, it matters for a couple reasons. Let's talk about why it matters for you and then why it matters for the other person. So I like to move slowly through these conversations so that I can, let's say I say, this is what lichen sclerosus is. Then I take a moment and pause and I kind of check in with myself. I kind of ask myself, how are you? Are you okay to keep going? Are you okay to now engage in some of the heavier side? Because sometimes that might be enough. That's it for the first conversation. You just kind of say, I have this disease and this is what it is. I really want to tell you more about how it's affecting me mentally, but I think this is enough for today. I'd like to follow up and, keep this conversation going maybe in a couple days. So you can kind of check in with yourself at various points of the conversation and see what you need. See, are you okay to keep going? Do you need more time? Do you need less time? Do you need to kind of put the pause button? I don't know what I was going to say, but put the brakes on. I don't know, something like that. And then going slow also allows you to check in with the other person. So in this case, it's not just about, you're having a conversation about you, but a conversation is never just about you. There's another person or people involved. And so you also want to check in with them and see how they're doing. How are you feeling? Is it okay if I keep going? Would you mind if I share a bit about how this affects me now? Would you mind if I tell you some of my fears? Just, are you okay to keep going? I like to just kind of check in and make sure things are still feeling good and safe for everybody involved, and that involves the other person. And then finally, my last tip is to celebrate. Now, I say celebrate regardless of how this conversation went, whether you got through everything you wanted to say, whether it was messy, whether it was super clean, whether, regardless of how it went, celebrate, because this is a massive, massive step, and it takes heaps of vulnerability to put yourself in this space. So acknowledge that, acknowledge your strength, and celebrate a little. Celebrate means different things to different people, but just take a moment to kind of metaphorically hug yourself, metaphorically high five yourself. I don't know, maybe treat yourself to a nice meal, get yourself a box of donuts, which is my favorite thing to do. But whatever it is, if you really like being in nature, go take a nature walk. If you have like a comfort movie or a movie that makes you like really, really happy, put that on. Just do a little something nice for yourself, and acknowledge, the vulnerability and what you just went through. So those are my main tips with respect to coming out to others with lichen sclerosus.